Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your host, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino, and I am here with the other host, Joe LaVacca. You can find us on Instagram. That's where we are most active, at Joe Gambino DPT for myself, at Strength in Motion _PT for LaVacca over there. You can find this podcast on Instagram, Beyond Pain Podcast, and on YouTube as well, Cups of Joe _PT. And if you would like to work with us, you can find the application form down in the show notes. Feel free to fill that out, and one of us will get back to you. Welcome back, Joe boy.
Hey, it's good to be back. Lots of things to look forward to. This is the first episode in the new apartment. I did want to have a different angle, but as new apartments go, you learn about them as you live in them. And the one outlet that I thought would be perfect with the windows behind me, turns out it does not work. So here we are facing what will soon be the dining room area, but I'm excited. Avery's excited. It'll be a nice new chapter for us. And I just got a taste this week, because we've had access now to the apartment for the last couple of weeks, how great it's going to be to drop Avery off at school and then turn around and just come back in 60 seconds as opposed to 1 hour round trip. It was really nice today to get like a workout in and be ready to rock by like 9 as opposed to 10. And I'm just really looking forward to like the 5 or 6 free hours I'm going to have each week. And I think it's going to help me with some other projects that I've been trying to find the time for. But I mean, dude, that's like a whole extra day.
That's really nice. I'm looking forward to the days where I can actually get back up in the morning and get my workouts done then, because that will save me a lot of time and help me be a little bit more consistent. But the baby is making that hard. But he did have a good night last night. So hopefully we're doing a little turnaround where waking up in the morning won't be as challenging. So that's good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I did like that other view that you had there, though. So you have to figure out a way to get those windows in the backdrop. It's quite nice.
Well, luckily, any request I've put in so far, because it's just now a website portal. So it's also nice. I don't have to like wait for my landlords for, a month to take care of things. I imagine someone will pop up in a couple hours, if not maybe even during the podcast, to take a look at the outlets for us. So come next week, we'll have some windows next week, because I will not be in Colorado. I'll actually have a free settle weekend by myself to move at my own pace, get things organized. And that'll be like having 72 free hours. So really looking forward to that.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. All right. Well, let's shift gears here where we're going to be talking a little different, so to speak, as far as the podcast goes. We're instead of talking about pain and injuries and movement, we're talking about nutrition today. So where do you want to kick this bad boy off?
I think it would make the most sense, like we were talking about off air, is just trying to bring awareness to these labels that are on all of our food products, or most of the food products we buy. And I think that this was one of the first lessons I've been trying to even teach Avery. So it is something I bring up with clients, because they'll inform me that they don't eat a lot, or they barely eat at all, and they still feel, maybe a little stuck in the weight department. Or for some people, they might even find that they're gaining weight. With Avery as a 11-year-old, she, like every other 11-year-old, likes cookies and treats and chips and, the same things Olivia likes. And it's about trying to, I think, manage the expectation of when those foods or when those snacks are delivered, rather than thinking that any food or snack or item is particularly bad. I don't think that there's really any bad food, and I'm sure A lot of the Maha people are going to come after me for that comment, but I don't think it's very valuable, especially with children and especially with clients who are searching for behavior change, to label things as good or bad, because I don't think that's how our body recognizes it. So one of the things that you brought up that I started doing with Avery was just saying to her, look, I think you'd be surprised that the serving size of the cookie you want to eat is not 3, it's not a handful, it's 1. I think the serving size of the peanut butter that most human beings like, unless you have an allergy, when you actually measure out a tablespoon, you're very disappointed to see how a tablespoon spreads on one piece of bread. So these are little opportunities with these high caloric snacks that are so easy to overconsume. And let's face it, 2 or 3 cookies is not a lot for my stomach. So I can eat 700 calories of cookies and my stomach will not expand or be full. And therefore, I'm still hungry. So now I eat something else. And then just like that, boom, I didn't eat a lot, which is true, but I did take in a lot of calories. And I think that's one of the most eye-opening things for clients when I start to talk to them about weight loss. And they're shocked with how much I tell them I try to eat every day and I'm not gaining weight. And in some cases, I'm sort of like, well, I was really upset that I lost a pound last week when I tried to eat 5,000 times during the course of the day, just because I'm staying away from those high density caloric foods and I'm managing with some other things. What do you think about that? Is that sort of one of the top things that you would try to connect with people, serving sizes, or do you look for something else on those labels that we come across every day?
Yeah, serving size is definitely one of them because the calorie content on there can be tricky. The ingredients list is another one that's on there, and then obviously kind of just like looking at like the macros and like how much sodium and all the things that most people kind of tend to look for. A couple of things that you mentioned, I agree that there are no foods that are necessarily bad. I mean, I think everyone knows generally how to eat healthy. The harder part is actually doing it, but it all comes in moderation. If you had a couple of cookies, right, it's not going to make or break your goals, right? It's that if you're constantly doing it or you're stuck in a habit of always, skipping meals throughout the day and then binge snacking at night, right? Like those are the things that kind of derail you more so than anything else. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about habits later, as far as how people can get out of those cycles where they struggle. But as a calorie thing, that's a good one. I think most people use calories as a way to understand if something is healthy. Like all these snacks, they put them in like 100 calorie bite-sized bags, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, I can do that. It's only 100 calories, right? Like now it's healthier or better option than it is. It's not just because hey, I can have this bag and it's only 100 calories and it's less than what I normally would have eaten. That would be a good mentality to have around it, right? But it seems to be more of like, is this a better choice now because it's 100 calories as opposed to 500 calories, which isn't always the case. And with everything being processed, I think the ingredients list is probably the most important thing. And I remember when I was teaching at Queens College, I was teaching like a general fitness class, and we had a nutrition one, and I didn't know this at the time. I just brought it. We were doing nutrition labels, and I brought in some Reese's peanut butter cups. And I was like, okay, pass this around, look at it, and I was surprised when I looked at it because you would imagine, the way that these when you look at the ingredients list, the thing that's in there the most by percentage is like the first ingredient that pops up. So in Reese's peanut butter cup, you would imagine, yeah, sure, chocolate, right, going to be at the top. That's going to be a big one. Peanut butter would be at the top because that's the filling. That's like half of the thing, right? But peanut butter was like the very last thing. It was like less than 1% in there. So it's like, wait a second, this thing is like a peanut butter chocolate cookie in a sense, or whatever we want to call it, but there's no real peanut butter in it. Whatever they make for the peanut butter filling is just like processed. They make it like taste the way that it tastes, not actual peanut butter. So that was like one of those mind blowing things. And that's when I realized like looking at these ingredients lists become probably the most important thing because you can think something is a healthy option. And then when you look at the list, there's all these added crap that's in there that all of a sudden makes them a less healthy choice. So whenever I'm looking at something or I'm telling people, I'm like, listen, you should find stuff that has the least amount of ingredients possible if you're getting something that's packaged, right? Because all these things are processed. They're meant to have longer shelf lives. They put stuff in there that's not necessarily the best for our health, just to make sure that it can be on a shelf long enough for someone to purchase it and then consume it without getting sick, right? So, and I think they also do things to just create whatever flavors possible, right, that people are actually going to like. In the case of Reese's, right, where I was fooled. I mean, those things are delicious. I could pound 100 of them, right? But then you realize there's no real peanut butter in there. So I think that was an interesting one. And so I would say always looking at the ingredients list, making sure that there's as little as possible. My rule is like 4 or 5 ingredients. If I can get something within that, it's, a better option than something else. And then making sure that what you would expect to be in there is at that kind of top. And then all of these like process things that increase shelf life. You want to, like, if you don't understand what something is, you probably want to consume that in, less moderation and more, putting more into your diet. So those are, I think, the two big ones, calories as far as servings go. And then the ingredients list is a big one for me. And then, we'll talk about macros next episode and kind of some general nutrition concepts. I think when you combine all three of those things, it becomes much, much easier to make better food choices than it is, because obviously the best way is to not get the processed food and just buy the vegetables, the meats, and like stuff like that, and avoiding the processed stuff. In reality, that's not realistic.
Right. Do you think, because this is something that has definitely come up a little bit more recently with the ingredients and what's in my food and red dye 3 and all these other stuff that's coming under scrutiny now. And it seems to be interesting because there's so many ways to look at it, and it's probably that fits my bias. I think when your ingredient list is just your food, it's a lot easier to think that you're probably reducing calories in the process, right? So when people are going to the store, and I think I've heard Mike Ranfone, who we've had on the show, talk about this, where you're walking around, it's like, hey, your ingredient list in an apple is just like an apple.
Mhm.
That's all it's in an apple. It's just, grown, it's natural, it's this, it's that. Potato, rice, it's like, all the same thing. Meat is just meat, right? But I do think that there's chemical components of an apple and an orange and a banana that we could list out. And then that too would give us a really long ingredient list that we wouldn't be able to pronounce or understand. So I think that's where it gets a little tricky. Do you think, or do you guide people on the ingredient list because you want them to avoid certain things like a red dye 3, or is it into our initial conversation of, hey, the more ingredients you probably don't understand, the more it's contributing to higher amounts of caloric density? Where were you going with that? Because I'd be really interested to hear your take on it.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of the two. I mean, obviously, something that's, the further we get from whole foods, in a sense, the less healthy it's going to be for us, right? Like all of our cookies and the candies, right? Like they're the ones that have all that stuff in it, right? And when you get to the meats and things that come from the earth, so to speak, it's like a single ingredient. So we're looking at that. It's not all, they're not always attributed to higher calories. You can find stuff on a lower calorie, like I said, like you can put something, you can easily change calorie content by making things smaller, right? Or by changing the serving sizes, or, sometimes you can even just get like, noodles or something like that that's really not high in calories, right? But can still be highly processed in a sense. So I think when we're looking at things that you're putting into your body, things that are, sure, and they're doing all this research study and they're saying all this stuff is causative for cancers and other things, right? I think if you're just trying to be healthier for long-term health, the more you can limit any of the extra stuff that you're putting into your body, the easier it's going to be for you to feel better. I mean, there are some people that it probably doesn't really affect too much. I mean, they'll live till 90, 100 years old, doesn't matter what they do, smoke or whatnot. And that's just the case. And then there are some people who they're in chronic pain, they feel tired all the time. And then when they do make some of these changes, all of a sudden they feel better, the energy goes up. And, there's, I think a lot of it now is being attributed to like this chronic inflammation state that they can be in. I just think in general, I mean, just my own personal philosophy is the less crap I can put in my body, the better off it's going to be. I mean, I love cookies. I love donuts. I mean, like a good pretzel, like those are some great things. I don't know if I could, if a life would be fulfilled without them. But at the same time, like if I'm going to be doing that kind of stuff, I'm going to want to make sure that the other stuff around it is going to be meeting as best as I can, right? Like the 80-20% rule kind of like really fits in there, right? If you're kind of like, your nutrition is 75%, 80% on point, and then the other 20%, you're just shoveling whatever the hell you wanted in your mouth, you're probably going to be living a relatively healthy life that way and reaching the goals that you have because you're eating better options more often than not. So again, perfect doesn't need to exist.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I enjoy hearing you talk about that. I think that where from calories, next, conversation I usually would typically go to with people on like a label is just looking at things like, hey, staying away from too much saturated fat, looking at the protein numbers. Is a food that's going to give you 10 to 20 grams of protein per serving, depending on where we are in the day, and then kind of sticking to that. Because I think the label conversation almost becomes too overwhelming for a lot of the people I've talked to it about. And when we start getting into the ingredients, there's a lot of stuff that we have banned as a country that the UK and Canada and Japan and China haven't banned. But what gets really pushed in the media is all the stuff they've banned that we haven't. So, well, it's a two-way street there. The other thing that I've sort of read is, well, for any ingredient that's in a I'm trying to think of like what's in my pantry right now, a box of cookies that has been linked to, quote unquote, some carcinogen activity. It's sort of been diluted down so much so where the comparison would be you're in a school zone and the 15-mile-per-hour sign is up. It would be like us driving at 3 miles an hour in a school zone to increase safety even more. So we know that 15 is safe. We're fine with that. But when we want to then nitpick it with ingredients that we end up ingesting, it would be like saying, okay, well, then let's make the school zone speed limit 3. Let's make the town speed limit 17. Let's make the highway speed limit 30. And it just like keeps cutting all these things in half. So when I bring that up to people, they're a little bit intrigued by it. And then the last example I typically give is, well, if we're looking at these studies on what causes carcinogen risk or cancer risk in animals, they're not human beings, right? They're a much smaller organism, and they're typically ingesting amounts that are so high, we and you would never even eat that much. And when I compare the dog analogy I usually give, this is my favorite one, and you can tell me if it makes sense, because people have been nodding their head at it, and I don't know if it makes sense or not, so I'm in my own little bias circle. So I'm looking at Joe Gambino here. If we went off of what impacts animals, then we would never eat chocolate. Because if you gave chocolate to your dogs in a randomized study, and it's like, whoa, the dog almost basically dies every time they eat chocolate, do not put chocolate in your body. And yet, for you and me, it's one of the most delicious treats on the planet. And I couldn't live without chocolate. So I don't know where the two-way street crosses. This is something I'm interested in diving into more and bringing a guest on in the next couple of weeks that maybe we can hash this stuff out. But I think for me, after we get to calories and just giving people that awareness, which I think we both agree is like really important, because I'll never forget the first day I gave Avery that conversation. I was like, yeah, you can have some true fruit, the chocolate covered bananas or chocolate covered blueberries. Cause she's in her mind like, well, this is fruit. This is great. I'm like, yeah, well, here's a quarter of a cup. Pour some of those blueberries in this quarter cup, and like 3 came out. And she was like, that's it? That's a serving size? I was like, yeah. And think about how much longer this bag is going to last us. Look, it says 8 servings. This is going to be good for you all of this week and even the next time you come to daddy's house. And she was like so disappointed. And now, she's picking it up. So I think after those serving size things, I typically go with like, again, like bigger ticket items. I'm always going to keep now pushing people to probably protein first, making sure that protein calorie ratio is somewhat, reasonable. You're not going to eat a 500 calorie protein bar for 10 grams of protein. I think that would probably not be an even trade-off. And then like the big picture of just like saturated fats. There's not too much trans fats and things anymore, luckily. So I don't really ever have that conversation. I see them sometimes on labels, but I think for the most part, trans fats have been kind of eliminated, sort of eliminated. I mean, I think everyone around, kind of globally was like, this is bad for us. So now I think I just focus on those things before I get down to like the nitty gritty ingredient thing. Um, but I definitely do like it from a habit thing of like building your shopping cart. So I think that's where if we transition to a conversation like that, unless you have some other thoughts, the more things that you can just identify as the things you're buying, apples, bananas, potatoes, rice, steak, fish, the better it is to put into your cart. I think the opportunity there, which maybe we can dive into too, is then what do we do after that? Because now it's about cooking. Now it's about managing time. And then it's about preserving it for as long as possible because it's not going to have a long shelf life. So, what do you talk to people about when they build a grocery list?
As far as, I mean, that's, yeah, I mean, I think I've hearing one say probably like the rule of thumb would be try to stick to the outside of the store as much as possible because that's where all of your whole foods are kind of going to be. It's like your dairy, you have your meats, you have your produce, and then everything in the middle is going to be like all of your processed stuff. So if you're doing more on the outside, that's going to be good. Um, there's probably two ways. I mean, you kind of opened up two different conversations. One, we're talking about protein and kind of macros, and we can either dive into that route, or we can talk about how do we start to build the habits. I don't necessarily know if I talk to people about like when you're going grocery shopping, it should be like X, Y, and Z. I mean, obviously, you're going to want to try to pick the best options possible. But for me, when we're talking about how we're going to make the next change, it's taking one meal of the day where we find there's an opportunity for the biggest change, and we're going to start there. Okay, you're not eating breakfast, or your breakfast is, I don't know, you like grab an apple and walk out the door, or maybe you're just not doing anything healthy, right? It's like a donut and a coffee that you pick up on your way to work, right? Like, okay, in those cases, right, we're going to start with one morning. You're going to make a breakfast. I can help you come up with a couple options, and you're just going to start with that. And then once you can do that every single week, one time a week without missing it, then we had 2 mornings, and then we had 3 mornings, and then we had 4 mornings until we could do a whole week. And you can do that every single time, regardless of what happens or how your morning gets shifted. And then you can find the next opportunity, right? And that's how we start to build the habits versus like, you need to go buy this stuff. You need to go eat this much protein. You need to do this, right? Like if we make these changes, your shopping cart is going to be better. Macros are going to start to fall into place. We can then, once we develop the habits of like making your meals be, as, much better options, then we can start to say, okay, well, now we can up your protein a little bit more. Or we can, sometimes maybe that's where we start. Maybe their meals aren't so bad, but their protein is low because everything they're eating is either processed or on the go or for whatever reasons. Then we may say, well, what happens if we try to get this much protein in, right? That's going to make you more full. It's going to make you, it's going to make your plates better in general, right? If you start with the protein, have to build around it. There's a lot of positives that will fall in from that. And then once they do that and you can hit this target, then we can either up it or change it or move to the next thing, right? So that's really where my mind goes as far as direction or like how like this habit building. Like if you can do one thing really, really well, it's going to make changes. You can stick to it. Then we can make the next one. And then we do that over and over again. And then when we make these small things that you can consistently do, by the end of the year, maybe you made 3, 4, 5 habit changes, and all of a sudden your nutrition will look very, very different. And it's now something that you're gonna be able to do long term because they're habits, they're the kind of built in, versus it being like, I'm gonna go keto tomorrow, right? And you're gonna do it for a few months. I have a buddy who he picks up keto every now and again. He does it. He's like, oh, he's into it. He'll do it for 9 months, like straight. And then he'll go like 6 months. So like, I can't do this anymore, because it's hard, right? They're very, very restrictive. But when we can kind of do this, it's a slower process, but over the long run, right, you're going to be in a much, much better position because they're, easy for you at that point, right? Because you're not just trying to make these big changes, which can throw off your whole schedule, your life, so to speak, right? We're all busy, right? So for me to say to you, okay, well, now you need to home cook all of your meals. You need to meal prep on, Mondays and Thursdays, Mondays for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursdays for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, right? Like that might not be what someone can do today, right? Maybe a year from now, if they kind of build it up, they can. So that's where I like to go as far as habit building versus go buy this or go buy that or eat this specific thing.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think the sustainability idea you brought up is probably more where I was hoping we would dive into in this podcast. And then maybe in the next episode, we can kind of talk more about protein or supplements and things like that. But I think once you start this change in the shopping pattern, focusing on the outside, right? More fresher produce, right? If you find that you don't know how to cook or you don't have time to cook, then some of the things I recommend to my clients is we'll just go to that deli counter or the pre-made options in the supermarket. Because there's lots of good stuff in my supermarket that I just will literally buy, warm up at home, and I got fresh fish. I got seasoned asparagus. I got, some potato medley thing going on. And I'm like, wow, this is not that much more than would have cost me each individual ingredient. And it saved me an hour in prep that I was able to spend with Avery, that I was able to read or get other things around the house done. So I think that if you are trying to make a change, I agree with you, make the change that's easiest. It also might not be about adding. If people are struggling with soda, for instance, just switching to diet soda or Coke Zero can save you several hundred calories a day. And that might be something that you can start to work on. It could be eliminating cookies every day and making it special on Wednesday and Saturday. Like actually have like a little party for yourself where you light a candle, but make it special, make it fun, make it meaningful, because that should be a treat. And a treat loses its definition if you do it too much or you do it every day, because then why is it a treat? Why is it special? I don't have a birthday cake for myself every day or every month, every sixth of the month. I'm like, ooh, getting closer to my birthday, let's have a cake. No, I do it once a year. And that's what makes it special. So for the people listening, start with whatever is easiest for you. Whether it's drinking more water, that's an easy one. I think changing your flow in the grocery store, even going left when you normally go right, because I've also read that grocery shopping is very behavior driven. So if you always go in and make a right, you're probably going to end up going up and down the aisles the same way. Go left. Go to the outside around the other side first and then see what happens. It's going to confuse you. You're going to be all sorts. It'll kind of make some different changes. Go with a prepaid or pre-made route if you can do that. Or it just might be taking one thing away.
Yeah, I like that. Small changes. I think that's the easiest. Right? Big changes are very hard for anybody. We all resist change, so we can make those little changes. We can be a little bit better about looking at these nutrition labels and making slightly better options. Right, that's going to be helpful, and then make it as easy as possible. I think we all overcomplicate, what it is to eat healthy. Right, we all kind of know what it looks like. You just need to find what works for you, what you like to eat, and how does that all kind of fit in, and just make the best choices possible. No one needs to be perfect. You do that, you couple that with some movement, and you're going to be just fine. I think
Just fine.
there's a lot of fear mongering on the internet about food these days, where everything is bad. From I saw something this morning. This literally this lady. She was started with a bowl of oatmeal. And then there was a video of some guy behind her talking about how oatmeal is peasant food and it strips your bodies of nutrients. And then she was like, oh, she pushes the bowl away and then she gets a bowl of vegetables. And then there's somebody talking about why would you eat vegetables or seeds or roots or whatever, talking like, oh, it pushes that away, then brings out fruit. Same conversation. Someone telling you about how fruit is bad for you because it all turns to sugar, blah, blah, blah. And then there's this new one that I saw. She put it in the end of it where water is not good for you because
Water.
it's not a macronutrient. So it's like, what can you eat, right? So it's a hard place when you're trying to piece your knowledge through social media, because everything will be bad for you in those cases. I mean, even these like fad diets, right? Keto, right? It demonizes eating hydrates, right? And everything has to be high fat or protein, which for some people might work. I mean, some people are more sensitive to carbohydrates for weight gain and stuff like that. So they're probably going to want to have like, the range, we'll talk about this next time, like, 40 to 50, maybe it could be up to 60%, but that's probably a little bit too high for most people, so someone struggling with carbohydrates, just bringing that down to roughly 40%, again, slowly dropping it. If you're already at like 55%, right, going from 55% then to 48%, and then, slowly working your way down, that's going to put you in a much better place. Now we're going in a whole other direction here.
No, that's cool. I actually, of all the crazy things I see on the internet every day, the water one
That was
really
wild.
did shock me. And I had seen it just before Jordan Syatt did a very similar post to what you're describing, with you can't drink water out of a bottle. You can't drink water from your tap. You can't drink water that hasn't been distilled. You can't drink water that doesn't have a spring. And it's like every
You
time he
can't
went to go
drink
drink
water, period.
Yeah. Every time he went to go drink a glass of water, it was another conspiracy theory. And same thing. He'd be like, what do I do? What do I do? So I think the key thing is that just to realize that I think a lot of the times people are making claims on the internet for conversation, for sensationalism specifically, so they can get controversy stirred up. It doesn't necessarily make it true. And I think that's the closing thing I'll say about the kind of truth on the internet. And I saw this on the John Oliver show that was being explained by Facebook, and what they try to do with truth is that there's low truth in one corner with a low intent to mislead. That's just me being wrong, right? Then there's high truth with a low intent to mislead. That's just being right. And then in this corner up here, no truth with a high intent to mislead. That is fake news. Those are the hoaxes. But that's the stuff that everyone sees.
Right.
And that's why we have to be kind of careful with that stuff. So
Yes,
I like that quadrant of truth
sort
of analogy.
I like it. Hopefully this was helpful for people as far as just better food choices and habits. I don't have anything else to add, so you can take us home.
Well, everyone, we love you. Joe, I love you. And if you've made it this far, don't forget to tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Beyond Pain Podcast.